Well, without further ado, I want to introduce Phil Eberly to you, but before he comes up, I actually asked Misty Martin, our leader. I think she would do a better job of introducing Phil because of their relationship and the history they've had together, so give it up for Misty.
Now he's nervous. Oh, he's got something to throw at me. A little funny story about talking with Phil the first time, and I said, Phil, where are you from? Where did that accent seem so familiar to me? And he said, what, that I'm from Indiana? And it just so happens that when I started my career in the mid-90s, his brother was someone that I did some work with in Atlanta. And so when he was talking, I was like, do you have a brother by any chance? And so anyway, we've had a good time getting to know each other. And he's a really quiet person. I said he's going to have to really hold the mic up to his mouth so you guys can hear him. But when he speaks, he always says something that is so beneficial to our group. He is on our Economic Development Authority board, and Marshall, our chairman, is here today. Is this your first lunch circuit? Thank you for being here. But I've known Phil from working with him with the Cherokee County Regional Airport and all of the work that he has done there. And I was impressed to see this. You may not know, but he's president of Lead Edge Design Group that's based here in Woodstock, and so glad that he's in Cherokee County. But the thing that I really loved is 600 airport planning and design projects under his belt at 75 different airports, and including every project at the Cherokee County Regional Airport. So make sure that you thank him for all the work that he's done. When we used to pick up prospects from our airport, we used to be a little embarrassed about the looks of it, and it didn't put off a professional feel to begin with, but that is much different now. And when we have prospects from the U.S. or that have flown in from different countries, they're always impressed about the professionalism and with that new terminal building and the hangar space there. So let's get Phil up here. Welcome. Thank you, dear.
I'm going to switch mics with you, get you out of this chair here, Phil. Put it at. I love it. Love that. Thank you, Misty. Just kudos to our team and their ability to perform with excellence, as I sprung that idea on Misty about 2 hours ago to introduce Phil, so thank you, Misty.
Does Misty need to be talking to anybody about accents?
Wow.
Just bringing that up. Yeah.
This is going to be a good one. It's gonna be well, so just real quick, Phil, before you introduce yourself, or we jump in, just wanted to show some of these pictures that were taken from your website of different community airports that you've worked on. So these were great shots to kind of showcase what you guys have done, a little bit of what you've done. You want to speak to that?
Sure, exactly. So this is what we're supposed to do, is know what airports those are without the label of the airport name on it. This is all great. Upper left is Cherokee County Regional Airport. Do you see the darker colored pavement on there? That was an aerial photo taken right after the project where that parallel taxiway was done. And for those familiar with the airport before, up to and including when American Made, the movie was made, right where that parallel taxiway, and then just above it, that area that's dirt at that time, the photo, that's where the buildings used to be at the airport. The old terminal, the terminal is, so Misty so fondly referred to, where you open the door. It was a really rough looking old hangar, and that wasn't even the terminal. It was a lean-to built on the side. It wasn't a great front door to the community, but when you opened the door, there was a velour sectional couch. I mean, high-end. These are high-end things for prospects. And that was the waiting area, and that was the flight planning couch, and that was the, everything couch. So we've come a long way since then. Hopefully make it a little bit easier, for the county to bring in prospects and have a good outcome with them. But that's Cherokee County. Everything that's built on the upper side of the runway has all been built in the last 10 years. And we've added several things since then. The building, or the airport in the lower left is the Gainesville Airport, Gainesville, Georgia. I was just there yesterday morning at a meeting, for example. So that is a World War II era facility, named after Lee Gilmer Memorial Airport. So we do a lot of work there. In Georgia, there's 103 airports, 159 counties. So there's about two out of every 3 counties have a general aviation airport. Bottom right is in Winder, Georgia, 2 runways similar to Gainesville. Also a World War II era facility. In that picture, you see the dark pavement on one of the runways. We just completed a massive runway rehabilitation project for that airport. They have Zaxby's corporate aircraft coming there, so we had done that project in conjunction with them. And the one in the upper right is Meriwether County Airport down in Warm Springs, Georgia. And that airport it's little, but it was actually dedicated, most of those airports in Georgia are from the 60s, other than the World War II airports. That one up there was dedicated in 1932 by Governor Roosevelt. He would be elected, that was in May, he would be elected that fall. He was already traveling down to Warm Springs for the springs for his polio. So there's a real historic aspect of that airport. So we're working with them. We've already done a runway extension, a lot of leverage of things because the community is, there's a historic element to it. And that's kind of when we get into some other things, this ties into that. So what we need to do with each facility, and I'll say on that one, we're working toward a 90th anniversary of the airport and putting a lot of things in place, including like a small kind of Art Deco terminal building, so they can use the airport not just as an airport, but you see some of that grass around by the road out there for community events, because they're kind of lacking that in the county. And so we're just a source of pride for them that they have something special. And that's pretty cool. And we were just down there Monday. So we spend a lot of time out with our clients, and they're obviously spread all over the state. But that's a key part of what we do and some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So that's awesome. Cool that you had that.
Yeah, thank you. I thought it would give a visual to what you guys work on day in and day out. So thank you for that. Well, I'm going to put you on the screen.
Great. I'll turn this way.
Just in case you forget who we're talking about here. So I'm going to skip the lightning round questions this time. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. We normally do that, but I think for time's sake and just to kind of jump in, I want to do that. So hopefully that makes you happy.
That's great. I'm happy.
So tell us a little bit. I was talking to some of the ladies over here earlier about the fact that you're from Indiana. Tell us a little bit about life as a kid growing up there and what it was like, your family, and a little bit of your backstory.
So I grew up in on a farm, an apple orchard, outside of North Liberty, Indiana. So that is perhaps you've heard of it. Perhaps not. North Liberty, if we wanted to see a stoplight, because North Liberty only had a flasher, you would have to go to Walkerton, which was even another 10 miles. So it was rural. It was about an hour and a half or so outside Chicago, and it was about 30 minutes outside of South Bend, Indiana. So it was, because it was an apple orchard, where there were rural area, there were farms everywhere, my friends were at farms. And so the apple orchard aspect, which then plays in a lot of what we're going to talk about, kind of philosophical terms, the apple orchard was unique in that we had, for 3 months out of the year, we had a lot of people coming to buy apples and things like that. And then for 9 months out of the year, there was nothing going on. You were just doing the work, but there was nobody else around. For my father, I think that he enjoyed the quiet time, and then he enjoyed kind of being on for the certain period, but knowing that he would then get to be off for a while. And I told Jonathan when we talked about this originally, is we were really doing like what is now agritourism, but that wasn't a term yet. So what would happen is people would come out to buy apples, and you could pick apples yourself. You could buy apples in the little bags. We made apple cider out there. You could buy apple cider. We had pumpkins and gourds and peaches and plums, all kinds of other things as well. But people would come out to this, and we were out in the middle of nowhere, so they'd come out there, they'd buy stuff, and they would, ultimately you saw them using it as an experience where they'd come out and the kids could run wild and get going. And ultimately, and all of that was in Whitney knew him. But my father was, as I observed watching this over time, I had a spot where I primarily worked there was the sales room, which was just a barn with a big sliding door that opened, and that was where the racks where all the apples were. And there was a little built-in shelf right where that door opened, and my dad stood there, and there was this old cash register, which we actually have in our house now, and he stood at that thing, and people would come out, and they would get to interact with him, and then get their apples and whatever. And so I was actually across this gravel driveway in the cider shed, which we made cider, and it had what is equivalent of a very, 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 very rustic bar. And we would make the cider and pump it over into this cooler where it was kept cold, and then it would come out through the wall in these taps. So we had like a half barrel on the wall, a couple of those, and we had taps that they were Drury's brewery, which was in South
Cider tap, and you were
cider
underage serving cider.
Yes, and so we put an Eberly's Orchard sticker over the Drury's, but I was in there with that. Everybody came in, you had a little solo cup, you got some free samples, and then you could bring your own jug. That was back then. I think we had to bring your own jug. And then you could tell, people would come, you could bring your own jug, and it was like 50 cents cheaper than if we, gave you the new jug. But so I was there, and where I stood, I could see him across maybe about where that panel is away. And so observing year over year over year is they were coming out for the most part really to interact with him. And he was very entertaining. He would kid around. He's very, I think he could read people really well. So you could tell the people who were first timers coming out, you'd see him get out of the car, and the parents would lecture the kids on how they were supposed to behave. And he would pick up on the very first thing he'd do. There was a thing that he did. They'd come in, and he could tell the ones that, the kids want to cut loose, but the parents. So he would teach them, he would give them an apple, and he would teach them, for anybody who knows this, we say apple core. Other person says Baltimore, say who's your friend, and whoever they point at, you throw the apple core at. So he would immediately teach the kids that who the parents had just lectured, and then the kids would be throwing apple, and they were having to go instantaneously, and the parents would, ultimately they'd relax, and then the next time they came out, they knew right away that it was okay to have fun there, and there was a lot of that going on constantly. So the people who came back who'd been there before were kind of in on it. So they knew what to expect. But ultimately all that goes to what this is, which is, just, especially if it's around your parents or some other child, you don't realize what's actually going on. But over time and observing that, much later you're like, the apple wasn't the product. Because people weren't coming out there to get apples, right? They were coming out to have that experience. And we're just out here just growing. It's a farm, and you're out and a tractor won't start, and you're just dealing with regular stuff. Like I'd rather be in watching cartoons than out here doing this. But you get that sense, and then there's a tremendous oil, and people are really far away to come out there. And he would interact with, and everybody knew him. And at his funeral, there was a little kind of like a reception event, and there were a lot of folks there. I mean, we're probably more than almost the population of the town, right? Yeah. So as they came up in their town, everyone had a story, and the stories were all about something that he did with them that was like getting around. And as an example, random is one person who we didn't even know who had moved more recently, but they had moved not far from my parents, and there was kind of these roads that made a couple mile, if we call it a block, like you could go for a walk, ride bikes or something around this block. So these people had bought this house, and he was walking apparently, and he had interacted with them. He goes, that congratulations on the house, that's great, you're gonna love it. And he goes, I don't know if you knew that, but comes with that house is an easement, like a path that goes all the way. There was a lake on the backside of this field behind his house. He's like, so you have access whenever you want back to the lake. It's really good. They're like, oh my gosh, we didn't know that. So then the first time they go back there, the guy that owns the lake comes over, like, what are you doing? This is private property. And they're like, well, this old guy told us we could. He goes, I know who that was. But it broke down the barrier between them and the neighbor. Like it did little positive things, and it made the people want to come back. So that's kind of all a long story about that. But it does set the tone a bit of kind of how what I saw growing up, and how it ultimately affected me.
You talk about too how you felt like a little bit like an only child because of the distance or the
Right.
gap between you and your older siblings.
Yeah.
But do you feel like that, coupled with just watching your dad and being with him solo on the farm, shaped you?
That was a huge break. It was a huge break. So there's 6 of us kids all together. So there's 3 sisters, three boys, and they're 2 years apart. And then there's a 9-year gap in me. So thank goodness, all the hand-me-down clothes. They didn't think they were having more kids, so those were all gone. So that's good. And but it did put me in a position where I got to do that stuff more one-on-one. Like if I had been 2 years behind, I wouldn't have been in that because I've been doing something else, and so it didn't give me the same perspective on all that it would have had with all brothers and sisters. But yeah, so there's a big gap, and then that's kind of where the PS comes from. Is my parents being funny. There was such a gap that they made my first name in middle initial PS, Philip Samuel, so that as a joke that. Right.
Wow.
So it's only slightly scarred.
It's wired in your DNA.
That's right.
So, and we talked before, like, your dad's really love for people, caring heart for people. Do you think he was aware of that, or was that something that that's just what he did?
Right, so the interesting thing about that, because he was really quiet, so like Misty says, I'm quiet, and if you talk to Whitney, she'd be like, really? And so I think that for the typical person, the mix of that, of how much interaction that you would like to have and how much quiet time you want, I think his was on. What I saw from him was like that spike for 3 months out of the year, and then a more quiet time. Now he would interact with people in town constantly and all that, but that was interesting how that was made. Looking back at it now, and so much of what we have to do from a business perspective and what's required for us to be different is a lot of that, where we go out to all those places and we have to be totally focused on them and totally help learn what their dreams are so we can do it. So you spike that, then we come back at a more quiet time where we have to do something analytical. And so I saw how, obviously how he did that. Whether that's learned or not, I don't know, but it certainly is a part of what we do. So it's interesting. And us having a discussion, it was the first time I thought about that.
So talk a little bit about a little bit of your career journey, because you've been doing this for 30 plus years, 600 airport projects at 75 airports or more. That number increasing probably as the weeks go on, I'm sure.
There was a exact conversation yesterday.
Okay.
That's increasing.
But you mentioned something to me a couple weeks ago when we talked about, maybe it was in high school, I can't remember if it was middle or high school, where at career days, it didn't occur to you that what you do now with lead edge design was even a thing. Like, I didn't know people did that and you could get paid for it.
Right, so growing up, so when there wasn't a nice fall weather, in the winter, it was freezing up there. We got a lot of lake effect snow from Lake Michigan, and your job was basically, you had these really long rows of apple trees, and you had these trimmers, and you did a tree of trimming and got up on and then you went to the next one, and then you were just out there. I was like, this is what I want to do forever. This is what so you're kind of motivated to do something else. But the interesting thing from having the career days and people talk, and you consider what you might want to do and all that. But out of where I ended up, we speak at a lot of career days to kids, especially middle school kids, and make a real point to tell them what you might end up doing. It may not exist, you may not know it exists, or it may not exist at all right now. And using the point, talking to someone now, saying, your parents were in a career day. So, when your parents were asked what they wanted to do, did they say, I'd like to design apps for iPhone? Like, no, because it didn't exist. They couldn't consider it. But there it is. And that part, especially from an entrepreneurship standpoint, is, you may end up doing or being pulled in a positive way to something that's more cutting edge or is different. And I would think a lot of the folks who are interested are here, you're interested in doing something that's different. Or maybe you work somewhere and you saw how it was done, you're like, this could be done a better way. And so you want to feed that, that energy about doing something that's different. And so that, going back to that time in having the range of you can be a vet or a doctor or a pilot or whatever. That's great, but there's a whole other world out there.
Just opens up the possibilities, right?
So it's okay if you don't be effective. Like you may end up kind of cutting that path yourself, and that's a good thing. And if you limit yourself, you may think that's not on some level that's not okay or not normal, but it's actually really cool.
Yeah,
So
just
we're promoting that.
blaze a
That's
trail.
cool.
So talk a little bit about Lead Edge Design and where you came from. I know you started that about 5 years ago, but in your former firm, you talked about how you function very much like an entrepreneur within the organization. So as much as you're comfortable sharing from that to where you are now and then the transition.
Yeah. So let me check for legal purposes. Let me see who's in the now.
Everybody signed an NDA.
Everything's signed, right? You're now under the umbrella. No, so essentially, so in your traditional engineering and planning world, so you have this path, and then you get involved, and there's some kind of mentors along the way, but you kind of follow this path. And ultimately, for the industry, the product is a roll of drawings, right? So you're gonna design an airport, you're gonna design a shopping center or something. You produce this roll of drawings, and it has a whole lot of technical things in there that ultimately the client doesn't really understand, right? So the product that you're producing, so this is like what a horrific approach to a business model is. You're going to have a product that the client doesn't understand, is impossible for them to understand. So is it good or bad? Don't know, but ultimately they just want this other thing to happen. This is a conduit to get there, but they can't look at your stuff. But gosh, those cross sections on page 25 are amazing. They don't know. So they need to be amazing, but they don't know. And so ultimately in there, you're in the industry, you're doing that, and then you start to see, you're exposed to things, for me, exposed to clients and exposed to settings, and you see the more senior people are just, it's not their intent, but it's just what the industry is supposed to be. So that's what they do. They get a request for a project, and then they design the plans, and then they hand the plans over in like on a bridge ransom exchange for a set of plans for a check, and there you go. And then when they need something else, they call. And as you're in settings where there's interaction with clients, as a very junior person sitting there and hearing a senior person talk to the client, you're like, you're not listening to what they want something much more than just this, but this is mechanically, they know they have to have the plans and all that. So sitting there listening, you could say, gosh, we could do more, but what you have is this very technical kind of, it's not a product that it's not good buying a Ferrari, like I can touch this, I can start this first, it's like, this was worth the money, right? And so ultimately, what develops out of that ultimately is a very keen sense that you have to do the plans, like you can't build anything without that, that's what you have to do that. And people who are engineers and planners, and they went to school and they're proud of their background and what they've done, and that's kind of it. And then they do that. The part where you go beyond that and actually spend time with the client, and especially for us, we're fortunate. A blessing and a curse is on the airport side. There's a fixed number of clients, right? So like Georgia, there's 103 clients. So everybody that's in that business is competing in a horrific musical chair-like thing.
The same number, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So even if you have clients, people every day are trying to get them away, and you're trying to get somebody else's. Well, somebody's trying to steal out of your Easter egg basket there, and so the roll of drawings isn't really a differentiator, but you have to do well with that. So you end up with, for us, developing over time is the idea that kind of that's great. That's the game that everybody plays traditionally for 50 years or whatever. But we do something different, play a different game, which is we go to Meriwether County and sit down with those folks. They have very limited resources, but by being really good at our job and hyper creative with all aspects of it, if we can sit down with a client and build enough trust This isn't like going to a lunch or 2 lunches, but like really build enough trust with them where they will ultimately, if you ask, hey, what's your dream? What do you really want to have happen in your community? Not at the airport. In your community, what do you want to have happen? And what they give as the answer initially is one thing. After they really, really trust you, they will kind of do this. Here's what I'd like to do. And I'd be embarrassed if I said this the first time, but I know this is impossible, but this is kind of a dream.
But that's what you want to hear.
And that's what you want to hear, because at that point you can go, okay, we will go off and we will work on something at the airport, a potential project at the airport idea that we can come up with that feeds that goal that's a community goal. Then if you bring back a way for them, hey, we know what we talked about before, and so we thought of this, and we could do these 3 things, and it cost this because we're creative. We know you don't have the resources, and this is actually a path. In a couple of years, we could get to that dream. And that is so it's so emotional for them, and that's part of what we learn over that time. To that question is you have this technical part, and that's kind of what the industry does. There's this whole emotional side. If you can get to that, you end up then building things that are transformative, and you're also building your workload in a way because you're creating these projects that didn't exist. So they weren't on any competitive radar, and so that all feeds together, and it develops this layer of loyalty from those folks. That there is no way that they would ever consider another consultant.
So like you described it, it's a technical know-how mixed with the emotional intelligence side, right? Actually caring for their dreams,
Right.
and figuring out how to pair that through the conduit of airport design.
Yeah. So example, we hire somebody, and you need the technical training to an extent. You need a technical training to an extent. So we sit down, but we need you to be technical, but we're also looking for this emotional side that's not technical. So technical, when we're doing something where 2 + 2 must be 4, it can't feel like 5 that day. It's got to be technical, but we need you to be kind of emotional on this other side. And at first they're kind of like the RCA dog, what? Is that good? And so we're looking for specific people. But what it makes us do as an organization is, if we incorporate an emotional element to it, we are now, in a way, compromised versus our competitors who don't do that. Because there's going to be challenges that come out of that. But we demand, we say it constantly in almost everything, you got to keep your personality. We want that unique perspective. But when you have an organization that has that in our industry, that's not necessarily, it doesn't give you an advantage, but ultimately it does give us an advantage when we execute that plan.
How do you hire for that type of talent? How do you, from finding that talent to getting them in the room to acclimating into your culture?
It's very difficult. And I'll say this, is that there's some other, this is just with no age discrimination. I have gray hair, so no problem. Literally, it would be unlikely that you would ever convince me to hire somebody who's over, say, 35 years old in our industry. And the reason is because they have learned and probably had a level of success by running the traditional style. So if they've had success, that's burning their brain that they've been successful. You try to teach them something different, they're going to be like, yeah, that's fine, but I've had this way works, I know it works.
Why would I change, right?
Why would I change? And so then you end up, I mean that in a negative way, they're not as open to the ideas. And because they're surrounded, everybody that they would talk to in the entire industry would reinforce why they shouldn't do this. Yeah. And frankly, we do, this is a funny thing, we do work with Elliott in Dawsonville, they have a work. And Ernie Elliott told me one time, early, so if you don't know the Elliots for some reason, so that family started racing in NASCAR, 3 brothers, drove.
You're into racing a little bit.
Or just a tiny bit. I don't think we're going to go to 3 with that, no. So they as a family ran this business through and started beating all these other competitors who had been doing it for years and had factory support and all that, all run out of a little shop in Dawsonville, and nobody could figure out how they're doing it. And so Ernie told the story one time, having pressure of moving out of Dawsonville and moving to Charlotte, where all the other race teams are based, from the sponsors and things like that. And he said, not going to do it. He goes, if we go up there, when people go to lunch every day, they're going to be at restaurants filled with other teams and other competitors, and information's going to get out and all that. He said, I'd rather be right here in Dawsonville where they don't know what the hell to do. That's what he said. And so, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's a bit of the same way with hiring, where we have our brand. We know why we have our brand. We have complete clarity on it. That's a real gift. And so we want to instill that in our folks. So you hire, and then we spend a lot of time reinforcing that brand. And we know that for a newcomer initially, anything we tell you about how our stuff works is a bit like folklore. They haven't experienced it. So you just got to go with it, and we'll keep you on that path. But the first time somebody experiences interacting with a client who shared their dreams, and we make it happen, and you're at the ribbon cutting, and you're like, I get it. And it's so powerful.
Yeah.
Then every time you're facing something that's not, nobody else has been able to accomplish, other firms haven't been able to accomplish, you do not approach it as if that's an obstacle. You say, there is a way.
We'll figure it out.
We are the ones who are good at figuring out that. They are not. This is our brand. This is what we're about. So it gives us a freedom in approaching those challenges that half the battle is just removing the self-talk about why you can't do it. So
Do you have a favorite story that's really touched you that kind of fleshes that out? Like, what does that look like where you had that experience with a customer and it has reinforced your values and was a powerful story back to the culture?
I think if we do our job right, if we run this right, it happens constantly. And I think at the point it quits happening, we're not executing the brand. So the interesting thing about it, I would say it this way, like if we use that, like that Meriwether County as an example, they, of the 103 airports, there are some that are, spectacular clients, and you're running your goals for next year, and I'm sure our competitors go, oh yes, we'll just pick up these 3 airports and it'll hit all our goals and it'll be great. And then there's airports that have one based aircraft or no based aircraft that are, I was about to say what, I think I'm not doing that. And so the targets they pursue are all kind of mechanically the same. So for us, like that Meriwether County as an example, that was a very short runway. This program came out, it was actually out of the tobacco settlement money that each state got. And there was a program that came out that we felt like, hey, you could utilize this in a way. It's not really the intent of the program, but you could utilize this in a way that we could apply, but it would only apply to certain airports, not ones that typically people would look at. And we looked at Meriwether as one of those. And we said, well, you could take, they had a 3,000-foot runway. So in Georgia, without getting into that too much, we need to really be at about 5,000 feet for it to be used by business aircraft because of our temperature and sea level elevation. And so they were at 3,000 feet and really had not had a lot happen since that dedication long ago. So we're like, you know what, we could probably get, in this program, get them to 5,000. It opened up some avenues. That was around the time that Kia plant was being built over by the Grange. And so we met with them, and I was actually interacting with the county manager down there related to signing a supporting document for another project that we're doing in a neighboring county that needed poorer county attached to it to help support the project. And interact with him and talking about some of that, he said, you know what, would you come to our next airport authority meeting? I'm like, sure. And went down there to the next meeting, and he was going to introduce me at the end of the meeting. So we're just sitting there and the meeting's going on. And so it comes up in this meeting is the consultant that worked there had sent these contracts to sign. And it was, they had some FA money that was built up, and it was probably like $150,000. And so this consultant sent these contracts that chewed up all that money to design things, but obviously there'd be no money to build anything. So, I mean, whatever. without naming the consultant, you're like, okay, nice. Like, are you really, is that about you or is that about this community? So that comes up on the agenda before our part where he's getting introduced me comes up, and I'm sitting there. They sign that, and that's the money they can use to leverage this bigger thing where they get extended runway and get hangars for planes. And so sitting there and just think, you know what, it doesn't matter. I mean, if we're gonna do what we do. And so it's like, excuse me, you don't know me, but don't sign that. and so before you do that, like, let's talk about these other opportunities. And so by the time you're done talking about that, how you could leverage that money and get a runway extension, these hangars, and so they were, literally they were like, when can we start doing that? And so they switched out. We did that extension, and they had a hospital down there that was closing right about the time that the company that ran the hospital couldn't make it work. By extending the runway at that time, there was a firm out of Augusta who could take over the hospital because they could fly in the doctors a couple of times a week because of the runway. So then when you have that happen, you're like, was it a good idea to speak up at that meeting? You're like, if I hadn't, there's not 5,000. So those things happen, and even the people who were at that meeting may not remember all that, but I certainly did. And so it just
the bigger picture, right? Who would have thought the connection between that and then just quality healthcare or just healthcare period to a community?
And because of that springboard, and then they filled up the hangars and all that, then they're positioned for this little track we have in mind to get to a bunch of upgrades by 2022, so that now the facility can be used for community things as well.
Talk about, I know we're almost out of time, to turn it over to you guys for 10, 15 minutes of questions. What advice would you give somebody here who is looking to start something, or they're trying to innovate from within where they are? What key advice would you pass on to them?
So I would say this, that typically something you might struggle with is you've got kind of being part of the herd is safe, right? So when you have ideas of what you could do and be different, or maybe go out on your own, that's energizing, but ultimately that energy is confronted by fear. So the thought as you go forward with that is the herd is safe. The herd is safety. So like it kind of go out and it's like, no, maybe I should just come back here. So ultimately for me, what happened, and I think it's really important for everybody, is at the point I was in a position with the firm I was at and had developed that our little group was very unique. We had our own brand and almost operated a separate company. They had no idea what we were doing. They looked at it, they had me come up and speak at corporate, 3 or 4 times and explain it, and they're like, and they're all roll the drawing photo. So what happened is they ultimately got to a point where I kind of didn't know what I was doing, but they knew that if I ever left, that would be a big threat. So what was initiated was, we're going to start moving you away from your clients, put another role which will generate them more revenue than they thought. And then we have other people handling clients. Then even if he left, that's okay because we've got these clients handled. So from the safety part of it is how I look at that is I go, okay, if I get separated and then I leave in a year, I won't have those same relationships because I'll be separate. And whoever takes over will damage them. They may actually change to a different consultant. So the safety of just staying, it wasn't a choice of staying and being in the exact same spot. And this is what I think is important. You can get the same spot. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to get better necessarily. So in that case, what I knew is what it would take for me to make the jump existed then. But if I waited, I might not have the ability to do that. That would be much tougher. So that being with the herd is safe, going out, scary. And so when you get scared, the idea of coming back, don't think it's going to stay the way it is. And one, maybe an analogy is Butch Cassidy and a Sundance Kid. They're up on the cliff, right? Remember that? In Butch Cassidy's, they're being chased, and he's like, hey, I've got an idea. We should just jump off the cliff into that river now. And Sundance Kid says, but I can't swim. And he goes, well, hell, fall will kill you, right? So I mean, I think that's a bit of a mentality that you can take, put in your pocket to offset some of that kind of artificial safety.
It was definitely a risk for you to leave, but staying was riskier.
I believe so.
Yeah.
And I think that's been borne out. It's very much.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many more questions I want to ask always, but I want to be respectful and turn it over to the folks here. So just throw up a hand if you guys have questions about what he does, his entrepreneurship story, his background, or maybe even the future. And I'll also look at the app if anybody's sending a question there. So who's got the first?
Don't take any questions from us.
Mark.
Hey, Phil, I'm really curious. You said there was 5 older siblings and then you.
Yeah.
The other 5, did they go off in this an entrepreneurial route, or they take traditional types of roles? I'm curious about the family dynamics.
Yeah. So one absolutely did. Another one was in a leadership role with a corporation where I think he was given a lot of freedom. So it would be my brother Steve, and so I think he got to function the same way. Oldest sister lived close to my parents and helped take care of them, and then the other 2 sisters to an extent. One I would say probably not, but that was more a function of just they were happy with their job. So
I appreciate that. Your quote there, "The apple is not the product," it's especially home for me because it took me a long time. I came up through the software world and I got into sales, and you realize very quickly that people aren't buying the product. People buy from people that like the people they trust.
that's it. And that's the same thing as that trust. And I'll go back to the other thing. So I think the idea that the freedom, like you can see that.
Yeah.
So you think everybody else does, but they don't, right? So then if you know that, then you know that you need the freedom to operate your way because you have a unique perspective that's positive. So you got to have that freedom. So whether it's entrepreneurship or some job that you can have that freedom in and you're appreciated, and that's not trying to be pushed down, especially in something that can be commodity type of business. And when that's what ours with the plans or the software.
I go as far as to say 80% of people don't understand that. You expect everybody would, you obviously know that, but most people have no clue.
And that's a real interesting thing, I think, to drill into is that what human nature and what you're kind of, if you're a polite person and you follow that you kind of assign traits to other people that may not be there. And so you prefer. And then if you pay attention over time as you go from early in your career to later, there's a point where you go, that deferring is not deferring to somebody that I probably don't maybe really respect on a certain element.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't defer. And that ultimately goes back to a little microcosm is that Meriwether County meeting sitting there going, if they sign that, this community is not going to deal with it. So,
Which is why I also wholeheartedly agree that interviewing people, trying to find that person is very hard.
it's very hard. It's almost like those traits that you want don't come into play till after a certain amount of time. Right? You can layer in some other things.
Yeah, they get a chance to be displayed and even practiced, right?
Yeah.
There's a question from Kevin through the app. Love the comments about the dream of the community. In your business, what's the flexibility of customers to engage with you and not solely the lowest bidder?
Yeah, so I've spent a tremendous amount of time out, and our people do as well. So in our structure, our financial structure, we take whatever, and then the good part of when you have a unique brand, it's like here, show everything, they can't perform it. So here's our secrets, I'll tell it to you, you can't do it, I know you can't. Because you can't throw money at people, but here, care, here's more money.
Right.
So we spend a lot of time on our clients. We structure essentially our marketing money is poured into, that goes to us being at our clients without them compensating to learn that. And then the peer-to-peer marketing, especially with our fixed number of clients, is real effective.
Does that look like flying across when you're invited to a commission, an open public forum or a meeting or something?
It looks like this. It looks like Monday we're in Meriwether. Yesterday morning I was in Gainesville at 8. Yesterday morning I was in Gainesville at 8 o'clock for a meeting. On the way to Calhoun, I was in a conference call at Calhoun at 11:30 for a meeting there, and then came back, and that's just what we do. And that's very hard to replicate. There's a lot of wear and tear, but if you know you're doing something for people, I'll add this key thing is we will not, there's only about 30 of those airports that we would ever consider working for, because they won't appreciate our brand. And we're not gonna put our people who are willing to give that effort and care in a position where it's not appreciated because it's negative reinforcement. So that's up to me to not put our people in that position. So we'll get calls from people who want to swear to God, that's not that. Until you care, you better have a dream for your community where it's not happening.
Do you want to take a question from Rusty?
Oh, come on. Come on.
What's your
Sure.
one question?
And Russ was we were in leadership Cherokee together.
We were. You're a good man, Charlie Brown. You really are.
I graduated.
I'm still wishing for that diploma. I haven't
It's not
gotten
even
it
a
yet.
test.
He's not even gonna say, right, but he, right.
Just show up.
Right.
I haven't gotten it yet. But anyway, God bless you for going to California. My gosh.
How dare you say
I lived in Dalton. I get it.
Is that a question? What is
Yeah,
that?
I do.
Okay.
With technology really taking its hold in a lot of companies, how has it made you not really change your brand? How has it made you kind of redo some things? Say, hey, we can't do it this way, but now. And how is it now? That can do. And my question is, how does that affect you positively and negatively?
Right, so I'm going to start with that first. The negative part is the technology puts barriers up to what we're trying to do, which is be there with the people, so we can see facial expressions and we can hear their voice and do all that. So if you don't consciously keep the engagement, the technology will make you drift to non-engagement, because you can say, hey, through this technology I can make more touches, but the quality goes down. So we have to look at how to take that technology and enhance what we're trying to do. But we've got to be just totally committed to that part where we're going to be there with our client, because it's very hard to replicate. We have competitors who say there's a selection going on in the airport who they're going to fit. They'll commit to doing it. We know they can only do it for a month or 2 or 3, and then they're going to fail. So we're not going to shoot that. I'd say something real quick is just in here in the event, there's a couple folks who kind of talking about how, like, this whole place and how it comes about, and everything you do is so cool, right? Isn't that great? Can we give applause for Jonathan? It helps cut down those barriers. So I'll just say this: just as being in the community and coming up and like Misty said, if you're kind of quiet and we're doing our own thing, this is very niche. Perhaps you may not know that that's very niche work, right? So we could be doing it in this room. Mark Goddard was on the steering committee when I was in Leadership Cherokee. In one of the sessions, we met. You took me to Burger Inn, and we sat in Burger Inn, and Mark was explaining how, growing up and kind of the roots of Keene, where everybody comes from and all that, and how kind of important some of those things. It layers that in for somebody who hadn't been here as long. On a trip to DC about 15 years ago to lobby for funds for the Cherokee County Airport, our beloved Chairman Marshall Day said in a limousine from the airport to the Capitol, he's espousing wisdom, and he says, never work for a branch office. And I was sitting there working for a branch office. At the time, I'm feeling like they're not really, and so that's absolutely right, but I ended up using it to advantage because they didn't have the oversight. And metrics they sent us that you have to hit and send checks back, but it allowed me to develop my own things, so that he's exactly right. And Pat Batchelor, who's standing up back there, Pat and I actually worked the last 2 places before founding Lead Edge. He was in a different division, I'll put it, but we kind of overlapped with that. And here's Pat at the circuit. So that's just, it's really cool. So it's just full circle. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. Any comments, Mr. Marshall, about that story? Fact check.
Just to clarify,
Okay.
I was talking about myself. I would never work in a division that's not a decision maker.
Yeah.
I wanted to be where the decisions were made to be part of. I had 2 things that I stayed true to. That was one of them. The other one was I never took a job outside of Atlanta.
You work for a very small company called Home Depot for
But those two rules that I had served me well.
That's good. Other questions you guys have?
You said you were a car guy. So who won the 2015 Indy 500?
So the 2015, Indy 500 was Juan Montoya. He was the second, that was his second win. He also won in 2000. So he holds the record for longest gap between wins at Indianapolis 500. Next question. So, on that note, know your stuff. So when we go places and talk to clients, all the FA technical stuff, if I said it, they wouldn't even know if it's right. So I actually use that as a tool. So like, let's do this. Like pull up, not right now, but like pull up list of Indianapolis 500. Say a year, I'll say who won and then details about it. If you say that to a client, they go, well, I can look at, like, I know that's true. Obviously, you have some ability to retain information. So that's funny. That's why we talked about that.
But you also have a unique thing about you. You own the third largest?
Well, I think it's about fifth.
Fifth largest, okay.
Right now. So I didn't really want to do it. Whitney just demanded, like, we've got to get more 8,500 autographs. I was like, okay, keep the peace. So this is, of all the, there's about 850 people who've driven in Indianapolis 500. And so I have about 540 autographs from about 540 drivers. But it goes back 100 years. So the newer ones are okay, but there are some very obscure things in them. So of people who do that, and there's a lot.
Do you have a goal of reaching the largest? You want to be the first?
There's a problem, I think, where the people who have the most, Mike Thompson, who Whitney has met, has the most, but then you're down to people who that's all the documented people. The others where they're so obscure that you don't even know what's an autograph from them or not. So I think, and it becomes the fiscally challenging value of some of those that get, like, if an autograph is worth $10,000, although Whitney's willing to perhaps pay it, I'm a little more reserved about it. So, but it's fun, and we go to that every year. We've gone since I was a little kid. My dad's best friend was actually a driver in the 500, and was the first rookie of the year in 1952, the first year they gave it a workout.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Another question: what specific lessons of customer experience from the apple farm have you incorporated into your work at Lead Edge? And I know you kind of spoke to some of that. Is there another one you want to share?
Well, I will tell I'm dying to tell the Reptilicus story, so I'll tell the Reptilicus story. Whether it has anything to do with that question or not, since we're in the political season, I'll not answer. That's right. So we used to have school groups that would come down. That's more my dad. We have school groups come down, especially from Chicago. When they get off the bus, the teachers, 100%, their only goal was the kids don't get lost, right? The same number of kids go back on the bus. So we come out and we put them on this, what looked like a hayride, a tractor with a little wagon behind with upside down apple crates, and they get in there and we had these little half-pack, is that even used as a long time ago, half-pack bags, little bags, they all get one, and be sitting in the thing, and the teachers were telling me that, like, that's their big concern, like they can't, but, so he would say, no problem, got it covered. So he would then get up on the tractor, and he would turn around on the tractor facing this wagon, so it looked like a little bit of like a ball pit or something. And he would say, okay, everybody, we're going to go out in the orchard, and everybody's going to get to pick apples, and it's going to be great. He goes, but one thing to let you know about is this morning the Reptilicus got off its chain. So when we get out in the orchard, just stay close to the trees just around the wagon. And every couple of classes, there might be one kid who's kind of like, wait a minute, like, I don't think that, these adults wouldn't put us in. But you go out and the kids would all stay, and then, a week or two later, you get in a big envelope where the teacher made them color, drawings from the, and there'd be somebody who tried to draw a Reptilicus. And a Reptilicus is a really bad Japanese, like, very poor man's Godzilla type movie from the 60s or something. So there was always layering in levels of humor depending on how much you knew him. And so I think one of the things that we can do for our clients out of that is we can make their experience with us enjoyable. And oftentimes what they're doing is, it is a service, right? So it's stressful because you can't touch and feel it. Our roller drawings kind of don't mean anything to them. So I think we can put them in a situation where they're comfortable, they're happy, and every time they interact with us, they feel good. They're happy to, about what that relationship is, and we can calm them down. And we really want them to feel like, you have an issue at all, you just pick up the phone and call, whatever, I don't know where my car's parked. We want them to depend on us like that. And I think that comes from, back then, again, it's not that.
Well, it's clear that the roots run deep, so thank you for sharing stories about your dad and how it's impacted you and how you that's wired into your DNA now and how you run your agency. And we just really appreciate all your time with the board and the authority that you serve, helping our team do what we do. And so you guys give it up for Phil.